Welcome. You're listening to the Keeping Ashland Healthy podcast, a podcast production of the Mental Health and Recovery Board of Ashland County, Ohio. Thanks for joining us. And welcome. You know, when we talk about mental health, we often talk about what's wrong. Labels like anxiety, depression, stress, burnout. Those conversations matter, but today I want to ask a different question. What does it actually mean to live well? Not just to survive, not just to get through the day, but to truly flourish as a human being. That question is being studied seriously, not just by churches or philosophers, but by researchers at none other than Harvard University. And what they're finding lines up in interesting ways with something many people already sense, that community, purpose, and faith matter deeply for our health and our lives. Welcome. My name is David Ross, and you're listening to the Keeping Ashland Healthy podcast. On today's episode, I'm going to draw heavily from two sources. Dr. Tyler Vanderweel, he's with the Human Flourishing program at Harvard, and author Rebecca McLaughlin, and she has recently released the book, How Church Could Literally Save Your Life. And obviously, I'll put both the references and the information in the program description. I recommend both these resources and individuals to you. So what is flourishing? Maybe it's not a term that you've used or heard a lot of. So Harvard's Human Flourishing program uses a simple but powerful definition. They say flourishing is, quote, a state where all aspects of a person's life are good, including the community and environment they live in, unquote. So in other words, flourishing is about the whole person. It's not just about feeling happy. It's not just about money. It's not just about physical health. It's about how all the pieces of life fit together. And here's something else that was important. Flourishing isn't an all or nothing proposition. Most of us are doing well in some areas of life and maybe struggling in others. You might have strong relationships, but be stressed at work. You might feel purposeful, but be dealing with health challenges. That's normal. So flourishing is something we move toward. It's not something we perfect. Let me repeat that because I thought that was really important. Flourishing is something we move toward, but it's not something we perfect. So 6 areas of flourishing are covered by this Human Flourishing program out of Harvard. They talk about 6 key areas that tend to matter across, again, different cultures, different religions, different backgrounds. Okay, I will briefly describe each of these 6, and I'm going to try my best to use everyday language. First, happiness and life satisfaction. So this is how content you feel with your life overall. Second, physical and mental health, not just the absence of illness. This is important, not just the absence of illness, but having energy and stability. Third key area, meaning and purpose. I think we recently did a podcast on this. Feeling that your life matters and that what you do is worthwhile. Fourth, character and values. Things like honesty, self-control, kindness, doing what's right, even when it's hard. Fifth, close relationships, having people who know you, care about you, and walk through life with you. And 6, financial stability. Not wealth necessarily, but enough security to meet your basic needs and reduce constant stress. So these are the 6 key areas. None of these alone make a good life, but together they paint a picture of what it means to flourish. So they point out that flourishing is not a solo project. Surprise, surprise. One of the most important insights from their research is that it doesn't happen. Flourishing doesn't happen in isolation. We often talk about self-care as if everything depends on individual effort. Well, Harvard's research shows that the health of our communities is part of our own well-being. As important as self-care is, I want you listeners to remember that the health of our communities and others is also very important for our own well-being. So If your community is fractured, if people feel lonely, if there's no shared purpose or trust, it becomes much harder for individuals within that community to thrive. So in other words, you can't fully flourish in a broken community. And let me pause to point out, this is why the board is so supportive of efforts like our mayor, Matt, and our commissioners, all the various foundations that we have in town, the United Way, our churches, our civic organizations, because all of these institutions, what they're trying to do is build and support healthy, connected community. So while the board doesn't fund these things directly, we support them as best we can because we know the stronger our community is, the better able we are to prevent any kind of mental, emotional, or substance use issues down the road. So again, I agree wholeheartedly with what the folks at Harvard have discovered. So strong relationships, shared meaning, good leadership, and a sense of belonging, all of these things matter, not just personally, but collectively. So loneliness is one of the biggest threats to mental health today. We've done several podcasts on this, and quite frankly, we'll do several more because I need to spread the word that loneliness is one of the biggest threats to mental health, which means isolation makes anxiety, depression, despair worse. Okay, Rebecca McLaughlin, I just want to mention her now, and we'll get into her book a little bit more. She makes this point in a very interesting way. She compares church to things we know are good for us, like exercise. So we all know that exercise is good for us, but we don't always feel like doing it. It's hard to get out the door, but when we do it, we almost always feel better afterward. Church, she says, is like that as well. It's not always convenient. It's not always easy, but over time it strengthens us in ways we often don't expect. So again, part of what we're going to talk about in today's episode is loneliness being a threat, and the opposite of loneliness is connection. All right. 4 places that shape our lives the most. So let's get into this. When researchers looked at what most strongly shapes flourishing over time, 4 areas stood out again and again. They're simple, but important and powerful. Not surprisingly, family at the top of their list. The people who raise us, support us, and know us best. Education, not just schooling, but learning how to think, grow, and understand the world. There's a robust debate, if you're in the education space, about this concept of teaching young people how to think, not just facts, but how to think about those facts. Work, the third area, not just a paycheck, but contributing something meaningful. So important to have a job, to have a career, but you want to have a job and a career that you feel like you're contributing something meaningful to the broader world and community. And then last but not least, religious community. This last one often surprises people, but participation in religious community shows up again and again as a strong support for mental health, meaning, relationships, and even, physical health. You might ask why? Well, because religious communities often combine regular connection, shared values, service to others, moral guidance, and support during hard times. And all of these things are actually powerful ingredients for a good life. So that leads me into Rebecca's book, How Church Could Literally Save Your Life. I just finished reading this book. I'm going to quote several pull quotes from it. It's not a long book, so I'd encourage you to pick it up if you're at all interested. She wrote this book, How Church Could Literally Save Your Life, and her argument isn't theological, so don't be scared off by the title. Her argument isn't theological, it's evidence-based. It's actually very much rooted into what Harvard is doing in the Flourishing Project. She points to the research showing that people who are actively involved in church, again, this cuts across different denominations, people who are actively involved in church tend to have, and get this, lower rates of depression, lower risks of suicide, stronger social support, greater sense of purpose, longer life expectancy. So let me read you a few of these quotes that really stuck out to me. Page 3. Study after study has shown that people who attend religious services even once a week or more are happier, healthier, and longer lived than those who don't. Page 14. Going to church weekly, Ashley, is one of the best protections against depression, sadness, suicidal ideation anyone has found. Right? In other words, if you aren't currently a churchgoer and you start attending weekly, you actually reduce your chances of developing depression by a third, according to the research she looked at. Page 17. Any honest suicide prevention campaign ought to include a recommendation to try attending religious services. So, again, as you know, audience, Mental Health and Recovery Board in Ashley County, we have a robust suicide prevention coalition, and we've done many trainings over the years to thousands of folks here. So I have not formally included anything about this. So I will try to confirm what the author, Rebecca, is saying and likely include that as another solution to our approach to reducing suicides in the county. Again, she does point out, this doesn't mean church magically fixes everything, and it doesn't mean religious people don't struggle. But it does show that regular, embodied community matters. Notice that word embodied as opposed to virtual, right? So another quote here on 22 I thought you all would be interested in. It struck me. She talks about how therapy and sometimes medications, they don't provide true community and purpose we all need. Okay, so again, she talks about they might have a role, but they're not the crux or the core. It's humans. It's connection. It's how she describes church. It's not an event, but it's family, because, and she goes on to say, it's not perfect family, it's not painless family, but it's a real family. And if you go to church at all, or either currently or in the past, you understand that it's very common when you're in church that you help each other out. You show up when somebody might be sick that you know. You might bring meals. We joke a lot in some of the previous churches I've attended about the casserole carousel, right? So all kinds of casseroles show up when somebody is under the weather or recovering. You help each other out by driving each other to appointments, particularly for folks that have transportation challenges. Sometimes you just sit with each other in grief, and then you also celebrate together in joy. So all of this kind of community, it takes effort, but it also involves disappointment sometimes and friction. And she's real honest about this in the book. But if you truly invest in church, you will get hurt at some point, which I thought was interesting. But that doesn't mean church failed. It just means it's human, because any relationship you have, whether that's church or not church, there'll be times when there's going to be hurt, and that's very similar to family. So she did also point to some of the research that said a growing number of younger people, especially Generation Z, are rediscovering church not because it's trendy, but because they're realizing how lonely life is without that deep community connection. As she puts it, many were raised with no church and are now saying, this isn't working. So I thought, what's striking to me is how closely her conclusions light up with Harvard's data. Again, the two basically are talking in different voices, and they're coming from different starting points, but they're both moving in the same direction with the research and the conclusions they're drawing. So a word about suffering in hard times. They both address this. One concern people often raise is this: what about people who are suffering? Does the idea of flourishing ignore real pain? And the simple answer is no. Flourishing doesn't mean life is easy. People can face serious illness, loss, hardship, and still have meaning, connection, and dignity. In fact, some communities facing the greatest challenges often show strong bonds, purpose, and resilience. Flourishing doesn't deny suffering. It helps us see what still sustains life even in the middle of it. It helps us see what still sustains life even in the middle of it. And I'll just say here for my Christian brothers and sisters out there, this is a direct tie-in with what most Christian faiths teach, which is that it often says, my life never got complicated until I became a Christian, but Jesus doesn't guarantee or offer a pain-free life, quite the opposite. But what he does promise is to be with us in and through the difficulty and the pain. So very similar, these two concepts of Rebecca's and in the Harvard Flourishing study on this point. Flourishing doesn't deny suffering. All right. So let me close by saying, a few takeaways from both these resources. And again, I'll put them both in the episode description. Mental health matters. Treatment matters. Support matters. But people, now hear me now, people are much more than symptoms. If you've been listening to the podcast or coming to any of the board events for any amount of time, we've been preaching, dare I say preaching, saying this for many, many years. We are meaning-seeking, relationship-shaped, purpose-driven beings. All three of those are important. We are meaning-seeking, relationship-shaped, purpose-driven beings. It's why the board has, as long as I've been here, and that's going on 22 years now, we have avoided simplistic definitions or conceptualizations of mental, emotional suffering. And I'm glad to say more and more research has supported that view. Harvard's research shows that flourishing grows where people belong, are known, share meaning, and show up for one another. All right? Flourishing grows where people belong, are known, share meaning, and show up for one another. Think about that. That can happen in a bunch of different contexts, but each of those are important. And Rebecca's work, I think, just puts flesh on that data. When she talks about the church, it doesn't replace professional care for folks that are struggling, but it does and can strengthen lives in ways nothing else quite does. And in a lonely world, let's be honest, that's something worth paying attention to. That's not just faith language. That's what the data says. So it's an invitation. It's an invitation to think bigger about what really matters and what it takes and what it means to live well. So I hope the Flourishing Project out of Harvard and Rebecca's book you found useful. I wanted to get this podcast in before we start the new year and as we think about the year that was. So thank you once again for another year of the Keeping Ashland Healthy podcast. This will probably be my last podcast of the calendar year. So Merry Christmas, and please, everyone, have a happy and safe new year. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Keeping Ashland Healthy podcast. The podcast is a production of the Mental Health and Recovery Board of Ashland County, Ohio. You can reach the board by calling 419-281-3139. Please remember that the board funds a local 24/7 crisis line through Appleseed Community Mental Health Center. It can be reached by calling 419-289-6111. That's 419-289-6111. Until next time, please join us in Keeping Ashland Healthy.